yourselves and continue to list the organizations that you belong to. And at this time, I'm going to turn the microphone over to my esteemed colleague and my older but younger brother. Y'all have to ask me to explain that some other time, but my older and younger brother, the Reverend Mark Thompson. So Mark, the floor is yours. Yes, I can.
Thank you so much. Reverend Mark, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for the space. It is indeed an opportunity that I cherish, to be in the space with all of you and your participants and guests. So real quickly, because I do have to jump in about 15 minutes. Last year, we presented to Sheila Jackson Lee, that's Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. We presented to her, as you said, 218 co-sponsor voice supporters. And what that means is we had 196 co-sponsors on the books, but we went back and we talked to folk who were not willing to have their name on the books. And they were agreeable to, if we got HR 40 to the floor for a vote, they agreed that they would come, and when their names were called, that they would actually cast a yes vote. In addition to those 218 Democrats, I have a letter from a Republican in the South in Louisiana who agreed that if we got HR 40 to the floor for debates and a vote, that he would come on the floor and he would cast a yes vote. And I understand that there are 2 or 3 other Republicans who committed to doing the very same thing. The problem was, as you said, Reverend Mark, House leadership refused to move forward with HR 40 for fear that they would not be able to maintain their legislative position in the House, and it would be because of HR 40. So we could never get them to move forward. We actually crafted amazing letters to House leadership. We sent a letter to House leadership. It had about 375 signatories from a variety of organizations. Some of you may have signed on to the letter asking House leadership to do the right thing. We also crafted a letter to the White House, and that had about 425 signatories on it. And we were unable to get Biden to move forward and give us an HR 40 executive order. And as you have said, it's not to give money to anyone. It is a commission. This country stands up commissions all the time. They'll stand up a commission because they want to know how many grains of sand on the beach. Oh, let's have a commission. But they have not agreed to stand up a commission. So on December 31st, 2022, we lost all 218 Democratic co-sponsors of HR 40 and the 22 co-sponsors for the Senate bill S40. On the Senate side, there were 22 of 50 Democrats who had signed on to become co-sponsor supporters for the Senate companion bill. On January 1st this year, the process resets and we start all over again. Today, there are 75 co-sponsors for HR 40, and S40 dropped yesterday, and we actually have 21 co-sponsors who are original co-sponsors. That's one short of all the co-sponsors we got for the entire of the 2 years that S40 was, we were lobbying to get co-sponsor support for S40. The fear we have is that no one knows who's going to be in the West Wing in 2025. We have to have an executive order because the executive order calls for the commission to be fully functional for 18 months. We only have 23 months in order to get that commission stood up, get the members appointed, and begin to do the work of the commission. The problem becomes if, as an example, the West Wing in 2025 has someone from the other side of the aisle as the president, that executive order could be overturned as soon as that person goes into the West Wing and, assumes the role of POTUS. There is a discussion that, we can do this in the first 100 days. Well, we've already gone back to what we did in 2019, what we did with the 117th session. And that is to have a hearing and then go to committee and get it out of committee. We do not have a majority in the House. And that means that we definitely have to get every single person, every elected official who is a Democrat, they have to come on board as a co-sponsor for HR 40. The sad thing is that this year, on January 1st, well, actually January 8th or so, when the bill was actually dropped, there were only 52 co-sponsors. In 2021, there were 118 co-sponsors. So we did not hit even 50% of what we gave Sheila Jackson Lee in the 117th. Fortunately, we did see a spurt from the first day the bill was introduced. Yesterday, I saw that there are 75 co-sponsors, but we're nowhere near 100, nor are we anywhere near 150. And in the 116th session before last session, we were told every time we got 5 co-sponsors, that's not enough, you have to get more. So my fear is that even with the 75 on the House side, we don't have the majority that we need. And what we're going to hear from the bill sponsor, Sheila Jackson Lee, is you have to bring me more co-sponsors. So that's pretty much in the first 24 days of this year. That's pretty much the overview of HR 40 and S 40. It is perfectly accurate. I couldn't have said it any better. We lost that opportunity, but we also lost not having the level of support we needed from the public. For example, when we sent the letter to the White House, we also released a petition for the people to sign that would go directly to the White House to Biden. I have not checked the results in the last couple of months, but we released the petition in June, and in September, there had been 17,000 visits to the landing page, but of those 17,000 visits, less than 4,000 even agreed to sign onto the petition to send a message to President Biden that we are asking for an HR 40 executive order. So even though they knew about it and they went to the landing page, they read it. They actually stayed and read the petition, but they left. So a lot of this is on us. We have to do a better job. And in doing a better job to send a message to the White House, we also have to do a better job of sending a message to our elected officials that we don't just vote for you to come to our communities and, photo op and pat babies on the back and photo op with babies. When we send you there with a special message or a particular message. And that message is what we need you to do to honor the wishes of the people. And lastly, I just want to talk real briefly about the tomfoolery that took place in the House the first week they were in session. If we could get that level of response over HR 40, and not just HR 40, but other pieces of legislation that are critical to the people, do you know how far we could advance? So to answer your question, House leadership let us down. There was no one, and I got to go there. The CBC didn't really push to say we stand behind this and we really want you, House leadership, to do your job and to push this HR 40 through and get it signed off on and pass it over to the Senate side. So there have been a lot of failures throughout this process. And we, the people in the trenches, we've been working, relentlessly to make this become a reality. And every time we get to a place, we find that those folk we entrust to carry out the wishes of the people are not there. And one final thing, the Senate bill, we don't have any Black females in the Senate. And that's really frightening that there's not one Black female in the Senate. So I'm just going to go there. We have 2 Black males in the Senate, one of whom is the bill sponsor for S40. The other person has never come on as a supporter nor a co-sponsor for the Senate version of HR 40. And it's to stand up a commission. No one is saying when you sign on to this that means that everybody's going to get a check. But as you said, we have to look at the pernicious history of our past as well as current day vestiges. And the only way we can do that is we have to send a message that we stand in solidarity and in unity. And to have 50% of our African American representation in the Senate not even supporting reparations. Allegedly, he does not believe in reparations. He only wants to support race neutral legislation, and that's the problem. So with that, I would like to again thank you for this opportunity and bid you all an amazing rest of your evening.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. We so appreciate you. Okay, and we'll have you back for further conversation and further organizing. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Here with us now is Professor Ray Winbush, and Ray Winbush is director of the Urban Affairs Institute at Morgan State University and the author of the book. If you look over his shoulder, he's got Dr. Welsing's book there, and he's got his book, Should America Pay, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. I want to start this way with you, Professor Ray, Dr. Winbush. As we talk about all of the battles we engage in as a people, like I brought up a couple, now everybody's on the news talking about CRT tonight. That's an important fight. But at one point, Kwame Ture and Malcolm X, when they were nationalists, came to the conclusion that the logical progression of one's nationalism would be Pan-Africanism. Is not the logical progression of our civil and human rights struggle, all the different pieces of it? And I've said this before, and nobody's disagreement when I said it. If everybody on this call, if we divided up every particular issue that our communities face, divided up amongst the 300 some odd people on this webinar, if we gave everyone one assignment on one issue, there'd still be 1 million assignments left to go in terms of problems we face as a people. Bottom line is, isn't the logical progression of our struggle in all of these areas, isn't it the logical progression to seek reparations? Doesn't that encompass everything?
It indeed does. And, it's like picking up an elephant by the tail, but if you look at across geographic areas, Africa, the Caribbean, North America, Europe, the only common political issue that unites African people around the globe is reparations. And it's always been this way. You can point, and I'll start giving a history lesson, but you can point to Sylvester Williams back in the early 1900s, 120 something years ago, organizing the first Pan-African Congress. He was from Trinidad, the Caribbean, Du Bois. I mean, it goes on and on. And through, what has amazed me and actually somewhat surprised me is that many of the groups that are calling themselves reparation activists right now didn't even exist 10 years ago, except in Cobra. And they are now denying that reparations is a Pan-African movement. It has always been a Pan-African movement. There's this emphasis on nationality. And like our great ancestor, John Henry Clark said, we need to quit talking about where the ships put us down, but we need to talk about where the ships picked us up. And if you talk about where the ship picked us up, it was on the continent and distributed us to South America, the Caribbean, North America, and Europe. So the answer to your question is that it does lead to reparation. What we've been trying to do in this country, I'll speak specifically of the United States, since we were first brought here, is to repair the damage that Europeans have done to African people in this country. And that reparations, that repair job, if you please, you can call it civil rights, you can call it affirmative action, you can call it 40 acres and a mule, but all of it has led to the repairing of the damage.
Very well said. We talked about, folks, obviously the national legislation, S40, HR 40. There may be conversations in your particular locale in and around reparations. Cities and states are doing, and we encourage that. People should not wait on the national legislation to get things going where they are locally in those communities. One place that's gotten, one jurisdiction, one state that's gotten a lot of attention is California. Can you talk to us, Dr. Winbush, about what is actually taking place in California? I know that there was some controversy, and if you could break that down for us. And this also lends to the debate. You alluded to some people saying that they want to confine this conversation, this bubbling up of conversation about reparations only being for one group of people and those who can prove that they had lineage and an enslaved ancestor. Most of us can't prove anything. That was one of the effects of enslavement, ladies and gentlemen, that we would not have. You mentioned Dr. John Henry Clark, a mentor of mine. He said the greatest damage done to us was our loss of ancestral memory. And that is borne out. Think about it, folks, when Hurricane Katrina happened, what people said they lost more valuable than their homes were their family mementos and the pictures of their family. That's called ancestral memory. You can't replace, insurance company can't bring that back. They give you some money, but insurance company can't bring that back. So talk to us about what's happening in Cali and how that's been handled.
Or even what's now happening in the chat room, because somebody already said, about the unconstitutionality, about Pan-Africanism. Let me say this. California was the first state. There's been several local initiatives in Boston, Providence, Rhode Island. I talked to some people here in Maryland just the other day, and we're getting ready to set up a reparations commission here in Baltimore. So there's been several local initiatives. Probably the most famous one is in Evanston, Illinois. California was the first state to say we're going to have a commission to study reparations. And it consists of 9 members. There's a report out, some 400 and some odd pages that you can get online about the initial California Commission report that was delivered July 1st of last year. Almost instantly, some of these groups in opposition to, or as they call it, lineage. And you know, Mark, you said it, and it's very important to understand this, that part of the system of white supremacy was to destroy our knowledge of self through history, family, whatever you want to call it. And so by a vote of 5-4 back in, I don't know, a year ago or so, the commission voted primarily to deal with lineage-based information. In other words, if you cannot prove a direct link to your ancestors being enslaved, you aren't entitled to reparations. This for me is just absolutely ridiculous, because when Black people were discriminated against in California, since we're talking about that, people didn't ask about your nationality or when did you get here, how long have you been here, and can you trace your lineage, back to enslavement. What I have been, really overjoyed about is that 2 weeks ago, San Francisco's commission said that you should give each Black person in the city of San Francisco $5 million for reparation, which flies directly in the face of the more weakened recommendations by the state commission on reparation. You start 5 million at a negotiating rate. That's where you start the negotiation at. One of the unfortunate things, my understanding is that they're going to appoint 5 economists on the California Reparations Commission. And I know at least 2 of them are into this lineage-based stuff. Most of these people have no understanding of Pan-Africanism. They have no understanding of reparations. They're calling what they're doing work of reparations, but they really don't understand the struggle. I've asked several people, I don't want to mention the groups because there may be some people on this call and they probably already know who I'm talking about, but they really don't know that much about reparations, not just on a global level, because they deny that, everybody over there, Black folk in the Caribbean need to work for their reparations while we work for our reparations. And many of these groups are backed by white nationalists who are anti-immigrationists as well. I'll stop there. Like I said, it's like picking up an elephant by the tail.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you are right. I've never, so folks, in terms of the state of the movement, prior to just maybe a year and a half ago, there was no need to defend the demand for reparations from the argument that there were people who were immigrants who would try to get reparations. It was like a solution to a problem that did not exist because we didn't even have legislation.
Right.
And so this false flag comes up, like Trump saying it's rigged, it's rigged. People start saying it was rigged for people who were not born in America to get reparations.
Right.
And then that caused an overcorrection of something that didn't need to be corrected because we weren't even there yet. One, in the history of our struggle in this country, and I see a couple of trolls in here too.
Oh, yeah.
Let me just give you all a little heads up. Whenever you see someone argue more against what we're talking about, and they're not arguing for anything for our people on any other front, any other issue, then you know that they're a troll. The fact of the matter is, in the forms that reparations must take, we have to consider everyone who's affected by it, and most jurisdictions do that and want to do that, and that is the way it should be. So with that, Kevin, I'm going to let you give some guidance on how we want to field questions. Are we going to refer to the ones in the Q&A, or do we want to bring anybody up? I'll defer to you on that.
Yeah, and before I do, I wanted to say just a couple things just really quickly.
Please.
And this goes to, the questions that come up about the legality of pursuing the challenge for reparations from a Pan-Africanist perspective. One of my mentors, an interesting story about how it came to be, but one of my mentors was Julian Bond, who told me specifically that I should not ever negotiate against myself. He said, you never go into a conversation by trying to figure out what you think the other person is going to let you have and then advocate for that. He said, you always go in and you ask for what's right. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to always get what's right? But you start the fight with the correct and the moral position.
Exactly.
You don't start the fight with, well, let me see what's going to make it through the courts. Let me see what's going to, how are we going to be able to get this done? And is this going to trigger a lawsuit? I don't give a damn if all of it triggers a lawsuit. I've been blessed and had the opportunity. I have been all over the world. I spent 4 years living in Italy. I can tell you everywhere I have been on the earth, Black folks have caught hell at the hands of white supremacy. It is one conversation. Now, we can break it down however we need to as we make our way through this conversation. But I don't want to relegate my outrage to I'm only angry at the people who were piloting this particular ship on this particular day, as though all of them weren't participating in the very same system and the very same people who we are dividing ourselves up from. Some of these are our relatives. Literally, these are our cousins. Not theoretically, not hypothetically. These are literally our relatives.
And Kevin, on that point, I gotta say this. You know what really amazes me? Some of those who are saying, well, you got to be anti-Pan-Africanism. Let's talk about our nationality as foundational Black Americans or whatever. What really gets me is how other groups never say this. So if you look at the history, and there's books out about this, if you look at the history when Jews after World War II started reparations, there's a brilliant book by Michael Finkelstein, I believe, is called The Holocaust Industry. They saw Jews, even though the Holocaust took place in Europe, they saw Jews worldwide as deserving of reparations. For example, in this state of Maryland, if you have a Jewish ancestor that was connected to the Holocaust, you get a tax break. That's the law, but these kind of pseudo reparations people are really saying only thing we should be concerned about is from Maine to California, and Pan-Africanism is, you can call it something, but talk about how African people are joined throughout the world with the same struggle about repairing the damage the Europeans meted upon us.
I want to say one more thing, and then we'll get into the Q&A, just because, and I promise y'all, I was not planning on doing a whole lot of talking, but I do want to say this because I think it bears stating. There was a comment that was just made that if we deal with reparations without knowing the legal landscape of it all, that's going to war without understanding the enemy's strengths. Or something to that effect. And Brother Chad, I think it was Chad who put that in there. And I don't want to misstate your mischaracterize your position. But I will say, in terms of understanding the enemy's strength, that is precisely what Dr. Bond meant when he said that we should not negotiate against ourselves. We should be aware of the other side's strength, but we should not be afraid of the other side's strength. At the end of the day, given all of the things that have happened to Black people throughout the world, we know how this movie ends, right? So we don't have to be afraid of telling the truth. And I will go here, even though this is a segue in the conversation. The fact remains, when you look at political strength, Black people in the United States, not saying Black people who could trace lineage, but Black people in the United States are the only existing political voting bloc that exists. We are it. You see who Black people vote for, we vote 90% for one candidate because we are the only existing voting bloc in America. We, Black people, who are 10% of the population, can sway an entire presidential race. We can sway congressional races. We have an inordinate amount of power for us to be 10% of the population. And everybody who is opposed to that has been trying to design schemes to come up with ways to split up Black folks.
Exactly.
Black folks who are invested in making sure that Black men and Black women stay at each other's throats. You got folks who are invested in making sure that young Black people feel alienated from older Black people. And now you've got folks who are invested in making sure that Black people who can trace their lineage to Charleston, South Carolina, feel distanced and opposed to Black people who may have come through the Caribbean. And at the end of the day, our strength is our unity. And you know what? As we go through this fight, maybe we got to make some different changes. Maybe we got to do some different things. But I'm going into the fight telling the truth.
That's right.
I'm not going into the fight breaking myself down or trying to figure out what fits or who's willing to have what piece of the I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I'm going to tell the truth. At the beginning of the conversation, white supremacy is a global phenomenon, and all over the world, Black people have been catching hell, and you can't go to any single country on earth where that's not the case.
That's right.
You can't go nowhere on the earth where that's not the case. And if we can't start there, we're not having the same conversation. I wish you well. You know, I'm not angry with you. I ain't mad at you. But we ain't doing the same thing. We ain't having the same conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I probably am mad though. Because it makes me mad. But I just want to say this: what Kevin Miles is describing, ladies and gentlemen, is what I'm sure his mentor Julian Bond also described it as. And only those of a certain generation will understand this. How many of you have heard the term "hat in hand"? You know, and that's what we used to do. I know Ray knows what that is. Dr. Wimbush knows that. When you start negotiating against yourself and you go in, well, we better. And see, there's some people who said. So I want to think about this now. There were those in California, Black people, who said, and there are those who say it nationally, some even in this chat right now, they want to shrink those who are eligible for relief as a favor to the state.
That's right.
We can't make the state pay all of us. We can't make the state of California. They say that when they voted to make it strictly lineage and reduce the pool in California, Gavin Newsom got out to bed. They said that's the quickest he signed a piece of legislation in history. So in case Black folk change their mind.
Exactly. So
somebody even said, well, how are they going to afford to pay us all? It doesn't matter. This country would not be here without us. So, you know, to rely on a system that by design prevents us from knowing our direct lineage, you are depending on a system and a part of the structural white supremacy. So with that, if there are some questions, and I hope that those of you who have legitimate questions aren't discouraged by the trolls. But please.
I am currently looking for Miss Karen Bringle. Sister Bringle, I just sent you a link. If you want to go ahead and click on that, you will pop up on the screen and you can ask your question. Robin Garrett, actually, her question had the most responses. However, I don't see her. I think she may have dropped off of the call. So Sister Bringle, if you want to turn your camera on, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Well, I'm honored to be included on this panel. I truly resonate with all that you have said. And my question has to do with, I live in Gaston County. I'm aware from the work in Montgomery of the Equal Justice Initiative that we have had at least documented 3 lynchings in this county. Mm-hmm. And I've made some efforts to try to get our county to work with the Equal Justice Initiative to memorialize these lynching victims. Anyway, in the process, I've come across some information about reparations for descendants of lynching victims. My question is, if you folks know much about what might be happening in our country in regard to that type of reparation.
Well, part of what these commissions and the national legislation, H.R. 40 and Senate Bill 40, it is, as I said earlier, is for vestiges of enslavement. Lynchings, desegregation, police violence, mass incarceration, segregation, all of these are vestiges of the period of enslavement. So most certainly, when Donald Trump sent Herschel Walker to testify against H.R. 40 during the pandemic, he was on the panel. We were on a panel testifying for it. Herschel Walker, bless his heart, was on a panel testifying against it. And this is what Herschel Walker said. He said, we never gonna get no reparations. We shouldn't have no reparations. And then he said, nobody did anything for my family when my uncle was lynched. That's what Herschel Walker said.
Oh.
And I said, well, Herschel, you just made the argument. That's why we're here. So something can be done for that. There are those, if there are those even in the chat who would argue the cutoff is 1865. That is absurd. So you want to do a separate, you don't want reparations for lynchings? You don't want reparations for segregation? You don't want reparations for the loss of voting rights? You don't want reparations for the black codes? You don't want reparations for forced sterilization? You don't want reparations for the Tuskegee experiment? The vestiges are happening right now. Those Memphis police who killed the brother, reparations. The loss of black curricula in the school systems in Florida, reparations. Dr. Wimbush, I don't know if you'd like to expound.
No, I mean, it's amazing now, like you pointed out Herschel as an example, but it's amazing to me how in the past 5 years that these questions are even asked about these crimes. Maryland, we've got a lynching commission right now, and we're determined to find out every Black person that was lynched in this state and where they were lynched, and we're going after the people and their descendants that did the lynching. And it's amazing right now that there are actually Black people who are like Herschel Walker, if you please, who are saying, well, there's certain Black people in this country that simply don't deserve reparations because they weren't born here, or they're, they need to take care of their stuff in the Caribbean and all of this stuff, and have a minuscule understanding of the law. They have a very minuscule understanding of the history of Black violence that has been perpetrated on us. Haven't read a book. And what I have been telling people, you have to look at who is funding these people, who is funding, and there's great articles on it. The people who are giving money to these Black folk, like white people gave money to Herschel Walker or Tim Scott over there in South Carolina. They are vested in having Black stooges limit justice for Black people.
And I would just add something else too. We are in solidarity with the calls for reparations around the world, including in the Caribbean. Many countries are trying to leave the Commonwealth now, as some of you have heard, because of the role of Britain in the period of enslavement. We would not be included. I wouldn't expect them to put me in their reparations proposal because very few of us, African Americans, are migrating to the Caribbean to deal with the vestiges there.
Exactly.
Amadou Diallo was lynched by the police. So the argument would be what? He doesn't deserve reparations because he wasn't a descendant of an enslaved person? Wait a minute.
That's right.
The police, the NYPD didn't know that. They saw a black man. When they mistreat people that look like Dr. Winbush and Kevin Miles and me, they don't wait to find. And how many of us here? And if we're now all of a sudden, and again, it's really a problem. It's not because we don't even have it yet. So it's not a problem. It's even about fixing. But if we now want to be black nativists against our sisters and brothers from throughout the diaspora, then we're going to have to get rid of Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, countless other people whose ancestry is in the Caribbean. The only reason I'm not Caribbean, the only reason Dr. Winbush isn't Caribbean, he might be, I don't know, or Kevin, is because the boat dropped us off a little bit later. Everybody here.
That's it.
If you're not Caribbean, hey, then guess what? Breaking news. You might as well be, because if what you didn't plan that. Thank you for joining us. We're ready for the next one.
All right, Melissa Hartman.
Yes. Hi. First and foremost, thank you all very much for this conversation tonight. I think it is very helpful, very educational. One of the points that I wanted to bring up, and that has helped in my understanding in what reparations are, and the group that I am with, is we use the framework that the United Nations uses. And this helps, I think, some people, especially allies, understand that there's a whole breadth of what reparations means. Doesn't only mean you get cash because of this, you get cash because of that. Sometimes it is cash. Sometimes it's simply an acknowledgement. I say simply, but pretty profoundly, an acknowledgement that we have lived in a systemically racist society. And you see the discussions we still have in 2023 of people that don't even acknowledge that truth. So there is a breadth of what reparations can look like. And I will digress a little bit, Kevin, from my question, because in the chat, people have compared to like the Japanese Americans and what they went through in the internment and their reparations. There's a very specific point in time in which the Japanese that were impacted with that could be identified and defined. What you all are saying, and what I think are saying so well, is that it's not so easy to pinpoint who in the 400 plus years of impact and inequity in the African American existence, whether you were born here, whether you were brought here on this ship, or whether, so it's hard to see people get caught up in using that excuse to stop efforts towards implementing and finding reparations. So are you all familiar with the categories of the UN framework? Do you use that as a way to try and help others understand the breadth of what reparations can look like? And thank you all again for hosting this discussion tonight.
And thank you. Dr. Wimbush, you want to address that? Dr. Wimbush was at the World Conference Against Racism.
Her point is well taken. It's just like Brown versus Board, specifically talked about school desegregation, but within 10 years, of course, the spinoff of that affirmative action, Title IX, open housing, a variety of things, the Voting Rights Act, and reparations are the same way. There's one group that is saying things like cut the check, as if the only thing that should emerge out of reparations should be money. Land is an issue, the stolen land, and there's been negotiations. I participated in one with some indigenous people in Alabama a few years ago. There are some Black people in this country, foundational Black Americans, if you please, who say, look, give me a one-way ticket back to Ghana and I'll go over there. I don't want to have anything to do with this country. And a good example of this was Geronimo Pratt when he was finally released from prison after 27 years. And he said that he wanted to take his money in cash and go and relocate to Tanzania. So reparations are going to take a variety of form. And it's not just cut the check. And I've told people who are in that movement, I said, look, the reason why there's an encouragement to support the group that talks about cut the check is because they know that they can have a reparations day. White people can get the money back. They'll have a reparations day sale at dealerships all over this country. Said, bring your reparations check here. So I think that, you know, again, those who advocate this kind of limited, incredibly myopic view of reparations really need to do some more reading. And again, I would encourage everybody on this call, including some of the misled people, that they, you know, study where the money is coming from. I'm not talking about the California Commission, but where some of these groups are being funded.
And not only that, in a COVID economy, in a working class poor economy where everybody's living paycheck to paycheck, if you gave white folks and black folks a check for the same amount, gone. Because everybody's trying to make ends meet. Nobody can afford to. Everybody's behind on rent and everything else. In this economy, the investment, and I want to commend the two white guests who jumped on, who seemed to get it, including you, Ms. Hartman. In this economy, none of that works. What happened was the white people think the white middle class came out from up under Cabbage Patch. There were homestead loans, there was FHA, there was Social Security, but now that's even obsolete. So you know what? If somebody said, well, what established the middle class in this country needs to be upgraded, that's fine. But we weren't included in the first upgrade, so we need two. We need the retroactive upgrade through reparations and whatever else is coming after that. So anybody who says giving everybody everybody got a COVID relief check, then where is it? How many of y'all saved that money and invested in something lifelong for you and your family with that COVID relief money? Raise your hand. Nobody. Not even white folks can say that. So just cut the check. You know, if the check's not for $1 billion, you can't do nothing with that. $1 million isn't a lot of, 20 years ago, $1 million was a lot of money. $1 million isn't anything now. If you make $100,000 a year, that's 10 years worth of salary. And if you make $100,000 a year in this country, that's still hard to make ends meet nowadays. So $1 million doesn't even mean anything. And you want to say cut a check for $5,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, everybody has bills to pay?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to do the economics, folks. So, no, you're right, Sister Hartman. And there are established standards. Some things you got to think bigger than, you know, Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. The UN, in many respects, employs higher standards. This is the decade of people of African descent. How many of you all knew that? The UN declared that this be the decade of people of African descent. Yes, I'm done.
And hey, we got one more question, but before we go to Brother Daniels, I do have one more thing that I want to say, because I'm kind of watching some of these comments in the chat. And before I say it, let me preface this by saying, you know, we are also blessed in my family. We have 2 Bibles that go all the way back to slavery, where everybody wrote their names in the Bible. And if they couldn't write their names, they drew pictures of themselves. So it goes back to the first name that was listed was Lafata Sholos, which I don't know. I still need to trace the lineage of where that name came from. But it ends with Tookie, who was my grandmother's grandmother, who escaped from slavery in Kentucky and made her way up to Cleveland, which is where my family lived. However, my grandmother had a child with my grandfather who immigrated from Sudan. Now, his family came over from Sudan with money. They bought a 4-mile by 4-mile square of land in what is now Shaker Heights, Ohio, because at the time, the land was considered unarable, right? So they sold it to Black folks for $17 an acre. He owned a 4-mile by 4-mile square of land in what is now a very affluent suburb in the Cleveland area. Now, on one hand, my grandmother, we can trace her lineage all the way back to the boat. My grandfather, who came over from Sudan, had a 4 mile by 4 mile square of land. And when white folks decided that they wanted the land, they just invalidated all of the deeds that they sold to Black people and they stole it. I am not able, nor do I have any desire to distinguish between the crimes based on the birthplaces of my grandmother or my grandfather. There is not a single fiber in my body that tells me that one crime is greater, one crime deserves recognition and the other crime does not. Or maybe we can address it because of my grandmother, even though it was my grandfather's land. My grandfather died paying rent on land that his mama owned. So when I hear people say things like, oh, well, Pan-Africanists are trying to make us give our money to the Kenyan government and this, come on, folks, that's disingenuous. The bottom line is Black folks are Black folks, and I'm just speaking for me. I'm not speaking for none of y'all. I'm not mad at none of y'all. Everybody do your thing. And I think these kind of disagreements and debates are healthy. We need to be able to exchange some viewpoints, even if we don't disagree. But I do not distinguish between Black people on the basis of how we were treated by our oppressors. One oppressor does not make you a different kind of Black person.
That's right.
This boat went there, this boat went there. We're not different kinds of Black people because white people treated us differently. That's how you ended up with all of it. I'm not doing that. I'm not playing that game with y'all.
That's right.
I'm not playing that game with me. And like I said, I can speak for my own family, where I've got immigrants in my family and I've got Black folks who I can trace all the way back to the boats. And there is no way that you can convince me that it is necessary or helpful or rational for me to say that I'm going to distinguish between the oppression that both of them suffer. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on that soapbox, but Brother Meshorn Davis, you are the final question for the evening. So if you will, oh, you are on camera. There you go. I'm about to pull you down. Here you go. I think you're on mute, Doc.
You're on mute.
I'm gonna send you a button. I think that might help you unmute it.
All right. Sorry for the delay. How y'all doing, fellas?
Hey, how's it going, Doctor?
Let me be the first to say I am absolutely on board for the conversation that reparation is a necessity conversation that we need to engage. I want to make that be the first thing I say because I know people misconstrue my conversation. I just want to say we can talk about reparation, and I'm part of a 5-man team here in Louisville, Kentucky, and out of North Carolina. And so we're saying that as much as as needed, that conversation, there is a much deeper and evil thing that needs to be dealt with. And that's the color construct that this country founded and built its whole economic game on. And as long as we still playing the game, it's like playing Monopoly. As long as we continue playing the game of being masters Black, then we can continue still being not able to get what it is that we're looking for. And the only analogy that I can give to you to help you understand is that I'm a surgical technologist. I work in an environment, like 98% of my environment is of the dominant European environment. When I read this book, America's Little Black Book from Dr. North Shelton, and I walked in the operating room, I didn't go to my people. I went to that environment and said to them that, like the two women y'all had on there, I said to them, how you doing? I'm no longer your Black. and I no longer see you as my wife. I understand that being owner of pets, I own name rights. I recognize the dominant European culture named people black. Well, as a person who's now 62 years old and grown, I no longer accept that name as being black. I say that I want to be identified to my ancestors, those who were bred right here on this soil of America, American slaves, American slaves that came and arrived here after 619 into 1776. Now, a lot of people don't want to, no, a lot of people don't want to abide that. Let me finish before I see you get on. Let me finish. All I'm saying is that the moment that I said that I was no longer their black, that I am an American descendant of slave, and I have a birthright, I have a birthplace, and I have an inheritance that's owed to me, an inheritance that's owed to me, because I'm an agent. That's an indemnity to me. I prove through history that this country owed my demographics of people through an indemnity of an inheritance. That's the conversation that I like to see us brothers talk a little bit more. We can't talk it all right now, but can we talk about removing color off the table so we can then talk about what is deserving to us in an inheritance? Anybody open to that conversation?
You want to go first, Ray, or you want to be the?
You go first, Mark.
Well, first of all, my brother, we are not descendants of slaves. We are descendants of the first civilization on the earth, a great and mighty civilization of African people, of black people, who even refer to themselves as black.
That's right.
So again, you empower our enemies when you say that they named us exclusively, and that our experience and our history begins with what they did to us in enslavement. I mean, that's pretty much it. Al-Kebulan is translated as land of the blacks. I think if you look at other words like Kemet and Abyssinia, you know, words that we use in our language. First of all their languages are derived from ours as well. So, you know, you can have that perspective if your lineage or your history, your sense of self begins only in 1619. But if you go back beyond that, the first people to interpret, I mean, the first doctors, the first scientists, the first astronomers look like us as African people, as black people. The first people to interpret humankind's relationship with God look like us. So, you know, I think we minimize ourselves when we say that they named us black and we want to be called slaves. That's what I would say.
And brother, can I ask you something? Why would you say?
Can I just respond to that?
We heard you. We both gonna respond, and you can respond. Go ahead, Ray.
Why
but you just spoke, and I just wanted to respond.
Wait a minute. No, wait a minute.
I'm just curious.
We didn't interrupt you, brother. Let him finish.
I've always been curious about Ado's people saying American descendants of slaves, similar to what Mark said. Why would you stop your lineage or start your lineage on this soil? How did your fourth or fifth grandfather get to this?
I am so glad you questioned.
Yeah, well, answer it. I'd like to hear
I'm so glad you answered that question. Okay, because I'm a believer, and I believe in the Spirit of God, and I'm a biblical man. Okay, in 1619 to 2019 is 400 years. Okay, so when I think about that, the dominant European culture didn't make us slaves. It was allowed to happen because my Creator wanted something to happen here that wasn't happening until we got here, until our seeding got here. And so,
whoa. You saying God put us in slavery?
Are you gonna let me finish?
No, I want you to clarify that. Are you saying God put us in slavery? Is that what you're saying, brother?
Oh, no. I would never say God put us in slavery. I clearly said, things that was allowed to happen.
By who? Allowed to happen. Who?
You said God, brother. You said the Creator wanted this to happen.
Everything happened for a reason. If you believe,
I can't do this. We can't do this.
In a God,
we can't do this.
Everything happened for a reason.
We good, brother.
Let me just finish this thought, and then we can be done. Then I'll be done.
Hurry up.
If you're not gonna respect my point of view, then there's no conversation. All I'm saying.
No, don't do
is
that either. You shown disrespect to us as black people in all your comments. You said we're slaves. That's all we are. You want to be called a slave. That's disrespectful, brother. That's what's disrespectful.
I'm proud to say, okay, but that my point is that I'm honoring my ancestors, dude. My ancestors that were
No, you're not. No, you're not. No, your ancestors wouldn't not a single. You think Harriet Tubman would come on here if she was alive today? You think she would come on here and say, "Y'all don't call me black, call me a slave"?
Man, so you hold on my ancestors that. So my ancestors was bled and died here on this soil don't matter.
Wait, just a minute, brother. Wait, no, hold it, Miss Sean. When did you hear me say that? First of all, I'm out here. We
hold on, brothers. Hold on. We're gonna. I muted everybody because we're gonna get this back in order, right? I'm totally cool with us arguing. I'm totally cool with us debating. I'm totally cool with us disagreeing. But we all gonna let each other speak. All right. And, and at the end of this, we don't have time for us to all get to consensus. We kind of knew that when we started. We're not all going to agree, but we'll hear each other out. So, all right, I'm going to let you all go ahead. But Brother Michon, go ahead and finish. And then Brother Mark, you come on in afterwards. But Brother Michon, go ahead and make your point.
And I let me say, if I disrespected or made anybody feel I was trying to, that is not my intent. My intent is that at 62 years old, born in Miami, Florida, my mother made me hate. I hated humanity because of the color of my skin, because of the way that she was raised in Miami. I hated. I didn't start loving myself until I went into the military and learned how to navigate in the dominant European environment. All I'm saying is that until we learn how to dominate this chessboard, this Monopoly board, this game right here on American Hall, then how can we give honor to anyone or our seeding to people who we are descendants from those people from Africa, but our heritage is here on this soil, not in Africa, right here. That's all I'm saying.
No, that's false, that our heritage is not in Africa. And that's a very damaging thing. So you can't move from hating being black to hating being African. That doesn't work either. And it's damaging when when we're dealing with young people when we say things like that. One. Two, Dr. King, I know you got Dr. King quote behind you, but you're probably not aware that a few weeks before he died, he said black is beautiful. Dr. King said that. I can get you the audio tape. He didn't deny his blackness either. He said black is beautiful. And he was moving more in that direction, and that's one of the reasons they killed him. So, I think I know what you're trying to say, but, we all have to grow in our enlightenment. As we learn more about who we are, we need to learn completely about who we are. And we are not just black, and we are not just slaves.
Brother Wimbush?
I have nothing to say.
Okay, since he has nothing to say, let me just respond.
I think we finished with it. I think we belabored the point because we're not going to agree with it.
No, I've had this debate with ADOS people all over this country. And, a lot of people say that John Henry Clark was arrogant when he said, I debate my equals, all others I teach. But I don't think it was arrogance because, you can't have a conversation. Like I saw somebody in the chat room just a minute ago. I glanced over there and they said, well, they sold those Africans sold us into slaves. So why would we identify with that or words to that? And the thing that gets me is that if I ask this person, what percentage of African people participate in the slave trade, they don't know. So how are you going to debate that? They don't know. And I know they don't know. So I don't have anything to say. I really don't.
Yeah.
All right, well, brothers, that was our last question. So
thank God.
But
that was draining.
But you know what though? While it was hold on, let me put my spotlight on. While it was a lot, I think that these are the conversations that we have to have. And I do want to say for all of you who have signed on and who have joined us, we are not going to run away from the difficult conversations. We are not afraid to disagree. One of the problems that we have, I remember back in the day, and Brother Mark and Brother Ray, y'all remember back in the day when the Black bookstore was the place where you could go and you could get into some spirited debates about all sorts of issues. Now you look around and most of the Black bookstores around the country are gone.
Well, that's right.
There aren't enough spaces for us to have Black conversations about Black issues. So what we end up doing is we only talk to a handful of people with which we agree. So I'm open for us to continue having these kinds of dialogues, these kinds of discussions, and these kinds of debates. And even if we don't all agree, that's perfectly okay. But we've got to be able to all speak our truth. We've got to be able to all be able to come out and say what's on our heart. Now, I didn't agree with what my brother just said in the last session when they were going back and forth, but I do support his ability to go ahead and to say it and to make his argument, because at the end of the day, when it's time for us to have this fight over whatever form reparations takes, we all need to be on the same page and we all need to be fighting together, because like I said, our strength as Black folks comes from our unity. And I will fight right beside any one of y'all if we fighting on the same side, if we fighting for the right things. I will fight right beside any one of y'all, even if we don't agree on 100% of all of our issues. I'll take you on 75% of the issues and then kick you to the curb for another 25. But having said all that, I'm gonna throw the floor back to Reverend Mark, and then but let me say this one last thing, because I'm gonna let Mark close it out. I want y'all to join us again. We're going to have another conversation next week. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's going on with CRT, the whole CRT, fake CRT fight that's going on. I know all of you have seen what's taking place down in Florida, where, and for those of y'all who were with us when we started this work around community first, we started by talking about CRT a good while ago when it was on nobody's radar. Right. And the reason was we were saying then that this is an existential threat to Black folks. This is not just about white people showing up at school board meetings with an attitude. This is a foray into a whole issue with them basically fighting against the teaching of our history. And if you can remove history, we see little slivers of it tonight. If you can remove people's history, you can remove the context by which we understand our condition. And if you can remove the context by which we understand our condition, you can keep us from fighting back, because we won't understand why we need to. So we're going to have another conversation next week about CRT, about what's going on in Florida, about them banning the teaching of AP African American Studies, about what we need to do as that metastasizes around the country. We're going to have some conversations about politics and how we need to do politics in some different ways. We're going to have some conversations about organizing, but we want you to keep joining us, keep tuning in, keep sharing the information. We're going to try to run a training every week for a while and just see how it goes. So with that, Brother Mark, I give it to you to close us out.
Well, thank you all. I want to thank Dr. Winbush, thank Dr. Kenneth Henry. Thank you for being here. I hope people will stay informed and continue to be enlightened. Marcus Garvey, one of his most famous statements was 3 words: never stop learning. Some of us reach a point where we think we know everything and we can't evolve and learn more. Trust, if you continue to seek the knowledge and understanding of our people, you won't feel a need to defend confining your history into one part. The history of Western civilization is barely the size of a thimble compared to the history of African civilization. And so when you confine yourself solely to the history of Western civilization, you are denying the true genius of your culture. Why do we need CRT? Because our young people need to know where they come from and who they come from. Perhaps if they were taught in such a way where all of the academic challenges they face, if they understood that we are actually the descendants not of slaves. Slavery was a part of our history, but that's not just what we are, but the descendants of the first mathematicians, the first scientists. Maybe that would do something for their self-esteem. Nobody's denying that enslavement happened, and nobody's denying the revolutionaries that were involved in enslavement, but CRT doesn't even teach that. I would even respect those of you who wanted to share information about the slaves, the enslaved ancestors who revolted and who overthrew their change and killed the white master and the white mistress. But, you know, we're not talking about that. So just to romanticize enslavement for the sake of romanticization is not enough. We seek reparations for the entire period of enslavement, for the entire hell that we have experienced even since enslavement and continue to experience here in America. So we hope people would be open to that. I'll leave it there. You know, a lot of things are being said, and people are exposing who they really are. When you say things about us, you're exposing who you are and who you might really work for. So, but that's fine. We'll leave that there. We trust that the majority of you are aware enough. Many of you are in the struggle for civil rights and social justice, so you know what's going on. God bless you all. We look forward to doing this again, as Dr. Miles said, weekly if we can. And we're going to continue to have these conversations. God bless you all. Thank you.
Take care.
Good night, everybody.